Hello, and welcome to Lore. My name is Jason Hansen, and I am the co-creator of Lore along with Mike Grosclose. In this video, I will be giving a brief introduction into what Lore is, what problems it's being built to solve, and how it solves them. And we're going to start by talking about application development in general. So app development is a lot like an iceberg, in the sense that it's a discovery process where much of the depth and complexity is not something that's initially apparent. When you're just starting out, there are a set of challenges and needs that are more obvious that you need to overcome. These include the core concerns like creating components, routing, and server communication, and a set of production concerns like integrating a build system and publishing to the web. But as your application grows, there are a lot of challenges you need to overcome that are much less obvious when you first start out. Some of these challenges are more functional and affect the performance or features that your application is able to provide. Examples of these include building support for pagination and filtering when dealing with large datasets, being able to adapt to API changes, and integrating support for WebSockets when your application grows to the point of adding support for team collaboration. Another set of challenges are more visual, but they're critical to being able to support good user experiences and communicate effectively with your users. Examples of these challenges include optimistic updates, complex creation dialogues, error handling, and being able to show visual cues like when data is being updated or deleted. To talk about what Lore does to help, we're going to start by looking at the top of the iceberg centered around the early development experience with React. React is pretty awesome, but getting started with it and building your first application can be a little difficult, as there are a number of libraries that you need to learn and compose together yourself in order to create a functioning application. And the challenge with this approach is that it does create an uphill climb before you can really get started with React and feel capable of developing a large application. It also means that there's a lot you need to absorb and understand before that awesome idea in your head can be transformed into code that other people can interact with. So the first goal that Lore has is to make it easier to get started developing React applications. To do this, it has a CLI that you can install, and if you run the command lore new app, it will create a project for you. Running npm start will then cause Lore to build your project and serve it in the browser, making it easy to quickly focus on your development goals. The second goal that Lore has is simplifying the development experience in general. Lore is a framework, and what that means is that it's already integrated a set of popular libraries to solve common application concerns like building, routing, publishing, as well as general application architecture and server communication. For each of these libraries, we looked at what were the most common tasks and challenges in working with them, and then integrated functionality into Lore to improve that experience. We'll start by diving into Webpack, which is the library that Lore uses for the build system. Lore includes a server at the root of your project, which will invoke Webpack to build your project and serve it in the browser. Lore also converts the Webpack config into a wrapper around the Webpack directory. The reason Lore does this is because it allows us to compose the final Webpack configuration from a combination of the common Webpack config plus whichever file in the /env directory matches the current node environment. Additionally, the common Webpack config file also comes pre-installed with common loaders to make it easier to drop files into your project and immediately use them. For a routing solution, Lore uses React Router. At the root of your project, you'll find a routes file where you can specify the route hierarchy for your application. If you need to change any of the configuration settings for React Router, you can do that in the config directory. This directory contains files that control all of the default behaviors for Lore as well as the libraries that it's built on. If you open up router.js, for example, you'll find the default history type for React Router set to browser history, but you could easily change this to use hashtag routing instead by toggling the setting for history type. This config folder also contains an environment directory that allows you to change any of the config settings on a per environment basis, just like you can do with Webpack. Next, let's talk about publishing. Lore supports two target platforms out of the box, which are Surge and GitHub Pages. To make publishing easier, Lore has integrated Gulp as a task runner, which you can see by this Gulp file at the root of your project. Like Webpack, this Gulp file is just a wrapper over the Gulp directory. For this example, we're going to deploy our project to Surge. To do that, we'll run a CLI command called lore generate surge. Doing so, we'll place a Gulp file called Surge into the tasks folder. Once this file exists, assuming you already have a Surge account created, you can simply run gulp surge and give it the name of the domain you want to publish your code to. This task will then invoke Webpack to build your project, placing the result in a build directory that will get pushed up to Surge. And once that's done, you can visit your project on its new home. Alright, now as of yet, we haven't really talked about any features that truly justify building a framework, but we're about to, so buckle up because this is going to be fun. Lore uses Redux as the library for general application architecture, mostly because it's brilliant. But we understand that Redux can be a little challenging to get started with. Just to interact with a single endpoint, like a set of blog posts, you need to create a set of actions to manage lifecycle operations like creating, updating, and deleting posts, as well as a set of reducers to keep track of posts within the application. And this is true of every endpoint. So if you needed to attach comments to posts, you would need to create another set of actions and reducers to support lifecycle operations for comments. So how does Lore help? And the answer is that it takes a page from server-side frameworks and uses conventions. To illustrate, let's use this example project, which currently has no actions or reducers. And what we want to do is interact with the same post endpoint we mentioned previously. In Lore, you do that by creating a file called post and placing it in the models directory. In many instances, this file will also be empty unless you need to tailor specific behaviors for this endpoint. Next, through conventions, the framework then converts this empty file into an implicit set of actions and reducers that support standard lifecycle operations. This implicit functionality is derived by extending a set of files that Lore calls blueprints that are able to duplicate the repeated patterns and behaviors you frequently see within actions and reducers. To use these actions, every component has access to a variable called Lore that contains all of the actions for the application using the pattern of the model name followed by the name of the action creator you want to invoke. So if we wanted to create a post, we would call lore.actions.post.create and pass in the parameters for the post. When this action creator is called, Lore will automatically send out an AJAX request to the API server, the location for which you specify in your config settings, and pass along the parameters provided. So that helps with making server calls, but that's only a solution for half of the real problem. The other half is the fact that components are the piece of your application that actually require the data. So how do we make it easy to declare what data components need and then fetch that data from the server if we don't already have it? To fill that need, Lore contains a decorator called connect, and we're going to use it to wrap both components here, an ES5 component on the left and an ES6/ESNext style component on the right. And once we do that, our problem is solved. To explain why and what this decorator does, let's dig into the ESNext version as it's a little prettier to look at. And we're also going to make our decorator a little more complex by adding a filter clause. So this expression declares I want the post where the author ID is 123. The first thing this decorator does is look to see if the posts have already been fetched. So it's going to look in the store and see if there's any data there that would represent the result of this query. If there is, it will get the data from the store and pass it to the component through props. If this data doesn't exist, it means the server hasn't been asked for that data yet, and in that case, Lore will automatically invoke the action creator responsible for retrieving that data. In this case, that is going to be the post.find action creator. This will cause an API call to be made to request the post with that author ID. Once this call returns, the store will update and the component will re-render. And this time, the post with that author ID will exist and the component will receive them through props. And with that, Lore takes one of the most complex challenges in React application architecture and reduces it to an empty file and a simple decorator. The takeaway from this is that conventions are awesome. With some sensible defaults and the right abstraction layers, conventions can enable a small amount of code to become an enormous amount of functionality. So that covers some of the advantages that Lore has for getting started in the early development stages. Next, let's dive into the depths of application development and talk about what Lore does to help your app grow over time. If you scroll down towards the bottom of the homepage, you'll find a list of common UI needs that Lore supports or will support in time. These include things like optimistic updates, utilities for dialogues, error handling, and pagination. Clicking on one of the links to learn more will take you to a page dedicated to that feature. Looking at filtering as our example here, you will find a video that demonstrates what filtering looks like in an application and why it's important, as well as another video that explains how Lore provides support for filtering at an architectural level. These architecture videos should be understandable to anyone who is comfortable with Redux and are intended to dispel any feelings of mystery behind what the framework is doing. At the end of the day, Lore is still a Redux application, and as such, these videos are also intended to provide an explanation of how to support this feature in your own Redux applications, should you choose not to use Lore or be unable to do so. And finally, you'll find some example code that shows how to set up and use each feature, and includes versions of the example code in ES5, ES6, and ESNext syntax. With that said, I hope you found this video informative and helpful for understanding what Lore is and what problems it's trying to solve. One last call out before I end this video is that Lore is still relatively early in its development, especially as far as frameworks go. So if you'd like to be notified as new features and documentation are released, please sign up for the newsletter on our homepage. And with that, we are going to wrap up this video. So take care, happy coding, and thanks for watching.